Welcome to what will probably be the last episode of Playing Politics with Alexander Keaton and Nick Bradshaw, as we've been canceled. We've been canceled because apparently that's what we do now as a culture. We just find people we don't like and we cancel everything about them. Of course, this is a joke, but we do have a special guest today, which is his name is Timothy Drake. He is here to we're here to have this broader conversation of cancel culture. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it something that we can change? Is there something to learn from? And really explore this concept. Tim, since you're the guest today, how are you doing? We'll let you lead off.
Well, I was doing good until that opening thing. I'm offended, and I think I agree. This show should be canceled.
Yes.
Kidding. No, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to the conversation to be had.
Wonderful. Nick, how you been doing?
I'm good. Tim, welcome up. We're glad you're here. It's going to be a good conversation. I think what we were looking at this week, Tim, to kind of make you the guinea pig, is that Alex and I were thinking about ways to create a platform for conversation regarding something that has become, I think, rather insidious, not only throughout pop culture, but crossing into politics. And I think that having a third person here to kind of create more of a round table, bringing different perspectives politically, ideologically, personally, and seeing how this is impacting people at different levels. So today really is just going to be kind of a round table on what are we thinking? Can we combat this? What does combating this look like? How is it affecting people? And where do we go from here?
Well, firstly, I would like to object to the use of the term roundtable. There's only three of us.
I was just thinking that. I was like, it's a triangle.
We're a triangular table here, sir. So you have misangled us.
All right, I quit.
Geometry matters, sir.
Oh,
Geometry matters. Okay, so let's perhaps as we begin, we should start with what do we mean by cancel culture, right? Like, what does this really mean? Because I don't mind the idea of companies saying, hey, someone has said or done something that is genuinely objectionable, and we need to do something about it. For example, if someone were to come out and it was like, hey, they believe in actual Nazi, like they're an actual Nazi, they believe in support, the Holocaust, and I would kind of expect and hope people would be like, yeah, we're not going to hire you, or we're not going to continue to support you on a channel or as a company because you are, this is a terrible, terrible thing. I think that's part of that. It's the market working, right? So what do we really mean by cancel culture? Does it mean, is there a difference between what I have described and genuine cancel culture? I will let the two of you fight over which one goes first.
Yeah, Tim, I'll kick it over to you.
Oh God, I was hoping to listen a little bit more.
Nope, we pushed you under the bus.
Okay, well, at least I didn't fall off a tightrope. So I don't know. It's funny. The last couple of weeks, I've really haven't paid too much attention to everything that's kind of going on until like a couple days ago, when Nick asked me to come on. I started reading up on everything that was happening, and I almost just don't understand. I don't get it. I don't get certain things. I mean, yeah, there's certain points like you pointed out. If someone comes out and they're like a full-blown Nazi, absolutely, that makes perfect sense. But if someone comes out with just a difference of opinion, all of a sudden it's this Twitter mob and everything just down their throats saying how they're a terrible person for just having a difference of opinion. And like the ideology behind cancel culture, at least from what I've read, quote unquote, is that it's supposed to open the door to diversity, and it's really not. It's actually kind of closing it and making it this small, tiny little box that if you don't fit into this thing, well, we don't want anything to do with you.
Right.
And it's yeah, I agree with you. It's just absolutely dangerous. And I also, from what I was reading and seeing, is that I think this is going to be really short-lived, because you're seeing people who were quote unquote canceled a year ago coming back, and they're doing great. So, but I also think that the cancel culture, I think one of the things that it unfortunately doesn't allow is for growth. So someone said something 12 years ago. Take for example, the director from Guardians of the Galaxy.
James Gunn, yes.
Yes, James Gunn said some things years ago, and
that he apologized for as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, people are just up in arms about it. It's like, okay, so he's not allowed to grow and become someone different and learn from his mistakes and make mistakes. We have to be perfect right off the bat. That doesn't make it. That's impossible. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody needs to learn. But it's just. I don't know. It's not a good starting place.
Well, and there's also it's in inflexibility. I'm going to double back here to James Gunn. While I found what he said and joked about, offensive, obviously, because I don't believe that those were the things that you joke about. It was also clearly not serious, right? He wasn't advocating. Like, I think there would be a difference if James Gunn was actually advocating for child abuse and was actually trying to advocate for those things. It was clearly it was a dark satirical take that was happening,
right?
And so people were like, well, no, we can't take it that way. Well, what do you mean you can't take it that way, right? I think that's, for me, the definition of cancel culture is this idea or this culture of trying to create ideological purity. And it is about destroying and shutting down any dissent or any conversation that makes whoever the real leaders of this thing is uncomfortable. And so it's really, like you said, it's supposed to create diversity, but what it's doing is actually shutting down diversity. Now, I think there are many people who are maybe supporting of it who don't understand that, but I think that the people at the top, the people who are sort of leading this ideological movement, I think they genuinely understand that that's what they're doing. I think that's even their agenda. It is to shut down conversation because they know that they can't win in the realm of ideas. So they believe if they just shut down this conversation, then they can sort of do and live with impunity, or they can have whatever their goals are achieved.
So I'm going to hop in here, team, and
it's about time.
I appreciate the. I'm going to earn my $0 paycheck. I want to tap into something without sounding cynical, as you guys know. I'm trying to see the light. I always want to see the light in it, and I think that we have to look at it by taking a step back and maybe having kind of a 30,000 foot view. So I would start by saying the beauty of something like the internet is that it gives everybody a voice. I think the equal danger to that on the other side of the scale is that it gives everybody a voice. And sometimes there are people out there that will weaponize things and like anything in the world, turn something that could potentially be used for good into something potentially used for bad. And that's something we have to be mindful of. And what I'm noticing is, in this realm of cancel culture, what is truly being taken are people's voices. And if you want to see a truly democratic society, minus any big tech influences with regard to censorship and whatnot, if you want to see where there's a truly democratic process at play, it was designed in theory to take place through social media. Now, again, there are instruments that are in place that are affecting that, kind of acting as magnetic forces that are pulling things aside with fact checking and censorship and what. But let's take it from a theoretical perspective that everybody has an equal voice and everybody can be there. There are a lot of people saying a lot of things that can actually be defined as hurtful, aggressive, hateful, designed to do whatever it is that they need to do. We can all acknowledge that point. But I think that what we have to also look at is what is the pathway that this is taking place? This is not some unique phenomenon. In my personal opinion, this is not an expression of First Amendment rights. This is a short-term power grab through the channel where currency is based off of your opinion, your credibility, your voice, and on the internet, it's all about your exposure, right? Your exposure drives that force. So what you do to impact somebody is reduce their exposure. You reduce the credibility they have. Well, how do you do that? Well, I've been trying to think this out because this is something I find vastly fascinating. And one thing I want to look at is the concept with which we have developed and explored within our culture, the concept of truth. Not fact, but truth. And the term that I'm going to use that I think all of you are aware of, and many of our fans listening, I think are aware of this term too, when they've heard people say things like, well, that's not my truth. That's not the truth.
Right.
That's not my truth. That personal ideological perspective that says how I interpret it through my lens is the determining factor with which I make decisions. Now, all of us have that. I simply look at that as being called an opinion or a preference. Where fact gets into it and where truth gets into it is whether or not it's credible, whether or not it holds up to scrutiny. So how do we take that a bit farther? We're seeing it saturate things like the media, politics, sports, religion, all types of things. You're seeing that now. The thing that I find most funny about cancel culture and the channel with which you strip somebody of their voice is this fundamentally goes against what I think people seek online, which is it's bullying. It's nothing more than bullying. It's a way of utilizing tactics to subvert somebody's opinion. And the way that I think that it's hard to handle is because it goes through a channel of endless ideological shape-shifting, as it's been called. And you can't follow, you can't stay ahead of it long enough to know when the rules change. A mutual friend of ours once used the phrase, it's a never-ending purity test that no one can possibly pass. So what I think you're going to start to see, because the question has to become, where do we go from here, right? Quo vadis, where are we going? And I think that if we were to look at what that future looks like, as you guys were saying before, this is not a self-sustaining environment. Eventually it will devour itself. And the question becomes, devouring itself, leaving us with what?
Well, so real quick, I kind of want to push back on something Tim had said. Not because I disagree with it per se, but I think it ties directly into what you just said, Nick. That Tim had mentioned that it looks like cancel culture is already sort of going away because people who've been canceled had come back. While I do think it's becoming exposed, I don't think it's something that goes away on its own. I think it needs to be defeated.
Absolutely.
Or it will metastasize even greater. Because like Nick said, it is going to eat itself. That's an inevitability.
Right.
The question is, what are we left with? And if we don't actually fight back against it, I think what we're going to be left with is an acceptance of this very totalitarian view that will absolutely just destroy free speech. And if we don't have free speech, we don't really have free thought. If we don't have free thought, then we can never really solve problems. And for me, that's sort of the danger of the whole cancel culture in and of itself, right? So let me throw one more element, and then we'll get back into this idea of what are we left with, and how do we get rid of it? If we can't look at actual objective truth, if we reject the idea of objective truth, if we have this idea that there are ideas that are just verboten, we cannot actually look at them or entertain them and explore them, then we can't solve problems. If we don't solve problems, then what we are condemning ourselves and our society to is this never-ending cycle of violence and poverty and trauma that then just continues to feed on itself, right? And that's not something that's productive and is intrinsically evil. The reason we chose the name Not Playing Politics, and the reason we have the symbols that we do of the idea of the Democrat and the Republican parties as chess pieces is that I think that that's what we've been doing for so long. We haven't really had cancel culture per se. Cancel culture is, I would argue, a byproduct of this. But we've had this idea that of ideological purity on a minor level that's sort of shaped both parties in their playing in politics versus actually doing it. And that's why, if you go back, the West Wing. I think we all love the West Wing here, right? We're all fans of that show.
It was a little before my time.
You got to let Barton.
Yeah.
Nick's been trying to get me to watch it, and I need to sit down and actually watch it because the first couple episodes that I saw, I really, really liked it. I just haven't had time to actually invest in it, but I understand what the show's about.
Right. So the main point here is that show was literally 20 years ago now, right? Mm-hmm. And yet it is very clearly all the problems that they're talking about are the same problems we have today. It's all the same thing. Now, what you'll find, though, is that there is a difference in how they approach it from then versus today, because they're all supposed to be Democrats and these good liberals, and they're saying and doing things that are kind of almost Trumpian in a lot of ways, or at least very Republican in a lot of ways, versus what we see coming now. We've grown. The ideological purity tests have been slowly developing, but they were always there. However, the broader point is nothing's changed. All the problems that you will hear discussed in that show that aired 20 years ago is literally what we're talking about today. And I think that's the problem. Because these ideological purity tests have never allowed us to actually work things out, all it's allowed is these problems to grow, to metastasize, and to get worse. And so now we're trying to double down. It seems like what we're doing is we're going to try and fix them by doubling down on the thing that prevented us from actually solving them in the first place.
And that's what a mic drop sounds like on the internet. And Tim, we're glad you're here. Congratulations, the new guy. You're gonna get bounced around a bit. I think, I'm gonna bounce off what Alex was saying, and we can bring. I see exactly what Tim's saying. I think it's a combination of not only people that are showing that they're recovering, but you have to ask yourself who's recovering. What are they recovering from? And secondly, I think it's also something that you combat with, but not with mobs and weapons. You combat with ideas, and you combat with having a better idea. The problem is that when you see a lot of these rallies and you see a lot of the things and I'm talking about some of the smaller ones that preceded what we're going through now. I'm talking about the last couple of years. When you had, Antifa presence or a lot of things taking place on college campuses, it wasn't designed to be listened to. It was designed to drown out. There's not a lot of conversation. In fact, a lot of the tactics that they're utilizing, you can read in certain pieces of literature and find out there. People always address Alinsky and other people like that. But regardless of that, there are tactics to going to basically sticking your fingers in your ears and saying, I don't want to. Because having a good idea to combat something leaves people to go back to that feeling of my personal truth. It can shake us. Think about those people in your life that have impacted you to get you to change your mind. And think about how uncomfortable sometimes that can be. Now, I've had the chance to talk to
people. It may be very uncomfortable at times, Nick.
Yeah, well, it can be something that we discuss with friends, family, colleagues, whatever. And when you feel your mind changing, it can sometimes be downright scary. You're stepping into a realm you don't know. To Alex's point, I want to kind of follow this path a little bit. I like that this channel's open. You mentioned it from a constitutional perspective. Here's the part that I find fascinating that I've also been thinking about. And if you guys can help me get down the road on this, I'd appreciate it. I'm more than willing to listen, but I feel like I've only taken it so far, and I don't seem to know how to go farther at this exact moment. And that's to say this. When we address the First Amendment, when I think of the First Amendment, it has absolutely nothing to do with a majority idea. Because if you hold a majority idea, you don't need protection of what it is that's going on. Because in a democratic republic, you should have that view reflected anyway. The beauty of the First Amendment is that by design, it is designed to protect the voice of those possessing dissent. It's designed to literally protect that which is not popular, so that those ideas can survive and sustain, and we avoid a simple Democratic majority driving everything. They tried that in Greece. How'd that turn out? And the reason I find it so funny is because the only argument I've been able to find right now is you'll see a lot of people say this has nothing to do with the First Amendment. We have no intention of quelling or removing the First Amendment. Well, this is what I observe. In their language, maybe they're not doing that. But in their action, what I see is that they're not going after the title of the First Amendment. What they're going after are those who dissent. And if you dissent, they try to quell the voice that is in dissent with their ideology. So it's no longer, well, I don't like what you say, but I'll defend the right for you to say it. It's, I don't like what you say. It is evil, and it is my moral responsibility, because this is my truth, to destroy or take away that dissent. And the channel and the tool and the vehicle that I'm going to use is cancel culture. So therefore, indirectly, it is an absolute assault on the First Amendment. But we're using these highly charged, if I hear the word constitutional crisis, relationships to Third Reich history or anything like this again, I feel like I'm going to bang my head against a desk, because it doesn't have to be this glorified, masterfully creative political movement. It can, the sound of liberty dying can come with a whimper. And I think that the way that you go after the First Amendment is by going after the nature of what it protects, which is dissent. And if you crush dissent by utilizing a tool like cancel culture, we're seeing it can, on the short term, it can be effective. So again, to the question of where do we go, I think it has to be, we combat it with better ideas that are proven to be more effective.
Well, and I would say that yes, I agree with combating it with the ideas. But one of the things that it's interesting, I'm not seeing it talked about a whole lot, is which maybe it doesn't need to be verbally like acknowledged. It can be just acknowledged quietly. But I have a bunch of friends that are getting political for the first time in their life. And it's very interesting to hear them talk about things because they're fleshing their ideas out. They've never really, some of them have never voted, and some of them don't really understand what is the difference between, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. Like, what are the true differences of these things? Because it all gets so clouded with everything now. But the other thing, to come up with what you're saying, combat it with, better ideas. We need to give a space for those ideas to be fleshed out. And I feel that those are going away very quickly. If anything is the true victim of cancel culture, it's I'm going to use a liberal term here, the safe space of to actually be able to talk. So I've got some friends who have they're fleshing out ideas, and they have friends and family that won't talk to them anymore because they said something that offended them or whatever. And it's like, really, we're gonna do that? Like, family members aren't going to talk to each other because one person has a different opinion than the other person, and it's just nuts to me that we can't converse and actually learn from each other, see a different opinion, and go, oh, okay, I see your point here. That makes a lot of sense. Maybe I need to reevaluate what I was thinking. Or vice versa. They say something and you go, wait a minute, hold on. This, and this. And then they get to go, oh, okay, you're right. I'd never seen it or heard it from that perspective before. You're right. That's a better idea. I like that.
Well, firstly, I'd like to say thank you for using the term flesh it out properly. For the longest time, I struggled with flushing things out. Also, I want to say to our listeners out there, it is a dog-eat-dog world, not a dog-eat-dog world. Yet another one I struggle with. The question that I bring to you, Tim, is this. And again, this is not me versus you. It's just as we flesh these ideas out in a good way. And I appreciate your willingness to create this space. And I don't think a term belongs to any group, but I'd say it like this. What channels, cancel culture applies a lot to online shaming, right? I mean, it's kind of call out culture perspective. What channels do you see being available for those in the minority? And I would say in the minority presently, whether you personally hold these views or not, I don't personally believe you do, but I think that will make you an even more credible advocate to recognize it.
I'm offended by that statement.
There you go. Well played. Do you see where conservatives can find channels to properly get their messages out without being placed under the same scrutiny as perhaps others who seem to be able to post I'll call it questionable material. If someone, for example, pushes a pro-Second Amendment perspective, and that gets a bit of a question. You've seen stories of it, right? A young man goes to the gun range and shoots his first bullseye, and he puts a picture up, and then the school district had that picture removed, or the members in the school complained, and it was taken down for images of safety. Other organizations will put up comments backing, tyrannical regimes to include the Ayatollah, if you will, and comments that the Ayatollah's made with regard to Israel, and that can stay. How do we thread the needle? How do we navigate that landscape? This is an open, honest question. How do we navigate the needle for all people to be able to get an equal voice out there?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say when you specified conservative voice. I was immediately was like, well, hold on. I don't think it's just conservatives, because I'm definitely liberal. I definitely lean left, and you know this in our conversations that we've had. I definitely lean left in a lot of things, but even I found in certain circles that even me just playing devil's advocate of something just to progress the conversation forward, so it's not just an echo chamber. Even playing devil's advocate, I have found that I get not harassed because I know the people that I'm talking to.
You get the look.
you get the, even if it's through text message, you could just feel that they're looking at their phone in a certain way,
Right.
And
exclamation points turn into periods.
right.
Yeah, the certain special way. Yeah. Well, okay, so let me touch on that for 2 seconds, because I think this is a great point, and I think maybe even gives us a way forward in a lot of things. Because you're right. I think that this isn't necessarily a conservative liberal thing, because conservative liberal are two ends of the same spectrum. I think
right.
what we're seeing now is the true manifestation of a leftist ideology that is where it's not just. So let me sort of peel the curtain back on myself personally. I have a religion. I have a political philosophy. I have an economics philosophy. These are individual things. One informs the other, certainly, but they are separate things.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the difference. If you're liberal or conservative, I think that is always the thing, right? Whatever your religious views are, your ethical views, your moral views, they inform the others. But you do see the economic and the political as maybe separate. You toy with them to make them all fit, but that you see them as separate things. I think the difference between the spectrum that liberal and conservatism is on is different from the leftist mindset, which is, it is an overarching, very strict ideology that is that it's almost a theocratic view. It's the morality, the religious, the economic, and the political are all one part of one solid ideology. And that's the problem. You can't say, okay, well, if politics is sort of how we're supposed to govern and how we're all supposed to live together, then we have to sort of omit. This is sort of the beauty of our system, right? Was the idea that there is a separation of church and state, that I cannot impose my religious views on you through the government. The government has to sort of remain neutral. But in the leftist ideology, that's all one thing. It's all intertwined. And so it is an imposition of views, of morality, of et cetera on that. And then therefore to deviate even in a merely economic or political sense is a moral sin. This isn't you have a disagreement of ideas. This is you are a heretic. You are believing in a immoral and heretical view, and therefore must be rejected. And that's why these conversations are getting shut down. To Alex, I'm sorry, Nick. Sorry, I'm getting all confused now. There's too many people in the show. To Nick, your point about how do we give everyone equal voice? I don't think it's about giving people an equal voice. I think what it's about is allowing voices to not be punished for speaking. Because I think the simple fact of the matter is, let's face it.
What I bring is what I mean is access. I mean access to it. Equity and equality, as we know, are very different things.
Right.
What I'm speaking of is simply, if you look at the landscape of online channels available for opinions to be shared, my question really at core is, because the arcing discussion we're having is that cancel culture is a weaponized form to strip people of their voice. But what we're also kind of dipping our toes into the brook here on is saying that cancel culture, online shaming, call out culture, whatever, the internet, online capabilities, digital platforms, this is not the only way that you do that. You're seeing through mob mentality, you're seeing through protests, things that are shifting certain perspectives in a way. Just real quickly here, you may, again, in an attempt to strip a voice, what you do is you shame the opinion because it doesn't line with your truth. There was a story coming out, if people want to check it online, that there was a story about people posting the city will have their construction zones up and it'll say, close for the next 10 hours or take this road. Okay. Somebody dialed in so that the sign would read, "The safety of all lives matters." And the mayor of the city publicly had to come out and disavow that and speak to people about it. Now, first off, you have to ask yourself the original question, is this truly newsworthy? Number two, what is the impact and the intent of this story being disseminated in the first place? And number three, what's to be said for an environment that calls out that? It didn't say things like, some anti-religious perspective, anti-Semitic perspective, anti-racial perspective. It had that perspective. And where we're seeing that now convert from language to action, which is what we want to be attention. That's kind of where maybe the conversation will go, is where does our thought become word, as we're seeing through cancel culture, and where does our word become action? And where you're seeing it is in the reduction of police force funding and reduction in crimes against police officers, meaning where certain states are considering reducing crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, which I want to support with another story that recently came out where you saw an NYPD officer being assaulted by people, put in a headlock, to the cheer of the crowd. So it's the stripping of a voice, because the only thing that's now starting to surpass the number of people being diagnosed with coronavirus is the number of police officers that are retiring in certain areas, where literally the number of coronavirus deaths are dropping below while the numbers of police officers retiring and leaving the force is accelerating. I'm grateful for the fact that we're getting the cause of the virus under control. I'm terrified of the fact that the number of police officers that are leaving the force, who went into that job as a hard job to take care of people, we need to hold them accountable. We need to make sure there's an environment present for all people to have an open dialogue with those that volunteer to serve in law enforcement. I absolutely believe that has to be accountability number one, hands down. But when we create an environment where the number of police officers is being reduced so drastically, the concern that I have is that regardless of the city you live in America, the certain parts of town that are a bit more challenging to provide law enforcement to, and the other sides that can financially afford it. And I worry that the people that might be impacted the most are those that have the most to lose. And that's the concern that I have. As I see, again, kind of rehashing it real quickly, as I see the thoughts and actions of what we view as a personal truth superseding that of what might be better for the good of the community, we are activating tools and channels such as cancel culture online to shape and frame narratives to drive feelings such that people act out on those feelings. And those actions are now being supported by local governments that are saying this is okay. And I worry that the long-term effect on that is going to be a lot more than just muting somebody's Facebook page because you don't like something that they're saying. You're seeing a transgression. You're seeing a transformation into action in your community where we're putting those that need support at risk from getting it. And that's the concern that I see long-term.
Can I ask one question then?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to phrase this very specifically.
Okay.
As we've already sort of stated, there does seem to be a difference from those leading this ideological purity test and those following it. If there is a leadership in this ideological purity test that's sort of creating this cancel culture idea, is it possible that they know exactly what they're doing, and when they target and lead on certain ideas, it is to get the desired effect? Like, I
don't think there's a leader. I think this is a loose confederacy of ideas coming together and being applied and implemented in a very, it's almost like we're watching V for Vendetta, the cosplay, you know, like we're watching an expression of a combination of, I think coronavirus has introduced a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety into society. Rightfully so. We all have loved ones that we're worried about. I have family in Florida. We all have family members that are older or that have dealt with physical and medical issues that we're concerned about their welfare. So I think you've got that compounding the problem. I think there's fear with regard to how the economy is going to be able to withhold and sustain people financially. So there's fear. And I think that when we have an environment like this, I don't see leadership. In fact, what I see is such an absence of leadership at the local level that we're not being able to address it. And again, I want to make sure that I'm making this point as abundantly clear as possible. Here in the local Central Texas area, there are some very, very affluent communities. Those affluent communities have the capacity, the capability, and the means to be able to create a consolidated or a localized police force, right? So their community is not really going to be impacted. Sure, their taxes will go up $6 a month. Okay, they're not going to. I mean, that's a rounding error for them. They're not even going to notice it. But to communities that are struggling, to communities that are being exposed to higher levels of crime, they can use support. And again, I want to make this point clear. From law-abiding, committed law enforcement officers that are serving on behalf of the welfare of all of the members of the community. And I don't want there to be a question about that. I worry that those are the communities that are going to have their resources stripped. Because what's going to happen when you start to see police officers being tackled in public and guarded in public, they're going to get a call. Just gameplay this out in your own mind. You're going to get a call. And let's use Houston as an example. River Oaks is one of the most prestigious communities in Texas, right? But let's use River Oaks. You get a call that somebody at River Oaks had a car broken into. You also get a call at the 5th Ward, another area in Houston, that says there has been a domestic violence dispute in a home with a potential armed member present. What call do you go to? Well, not only out of fear for your own self-preservation, but out of fear that if you show up someplace, what are you going to be accused of? What's going to make its way in the age of everybody having a camera on their phone? What's going to make its way cut in, however it is, to a channel? Circling back to our point today, that it makes it on your Facebook page and it goes viral, and now all of a sudden here's another example of something we've seen that's horrible.
Well, and I would
officers into horrible. I'm talking about the good guys, right? The good guys.
Yeah.
You're doing the job that are following the oath as they should to serve the public and protect. Okay. We send them into really dark, scary areas and then wonder, and I'm talking about really rough, dangerous things, dangerous environments, drugs, rape, murder, gun violence, whatever you want to see, and we send them into these very challenging areas, and then we say, well, I wonder why they would hesitate or feel fear or be concerned for their welfare or perhaps in the worst cases take on a more violent approach. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what would you do, truthfully?
I don't know. I've never been in that situation.
Well, and so here's the thing: to Nick's question and point, we don't actually have to ask the question because we've seen it happen. There was a recent study that was done. I wish I'd pulled it up, but they basically looked at cities like Ferguson and the others that have had, where you had these sort of viral outbreaks of this controversy, right? And basically, what the cops do is they're like, fine, since proactive policing is sort of what's causing all of this turmoil, we're not it. It's something they don't respond to the calls, but what they do is they're not proactively policing. They're waiting till a call comes in and then showing up. Well, the result of this study was they looked at the murder rate for multiple years prior and then for these years after, and they basically averaged it out to around somewhere between 800 and 900 people additional are dying in these cities. Now, I can't remember if it was, I don't think it was per se, I think it was total, right, over these cities. But that's an extra almost 1,000 people who are dying every year because the cops do take a more passive stance. They are stepping back a little bit. It's not that they don't show up to the calls, but they're not going to be there before the call occurs, right? They're like, well, if this is what's going on, we're not going to be out there looking for people. We're just going to wait till the call comes in and we'll respond to the calls. That leads to more dead people. And again, like to Nick's point, it's not leading to more dead people in good neighborhoods or in good, wealthier upper middle class areas. It's in the places where it's needed the most. It's in the place where violence is hard, where kids are getting shot. This is not at this point, it's not even a theoretical question. It's a question that's been answered. Right. But we can't even have that conversation because to have that conversation then again goes against the orthodoxy. This is what I'm going to push back, Nick, against your claim that there is no leadership. I think the cancel culture does have a leadership. It's just I don't know that it's necessarily as public as we think leadership is. There is a force somewhere driving this narrative because how is it that everyone jumps on board the same claim, the same words, the same ideology that fast? Right.
Well, but see, and here's something I think you've got a good point, and forgive me jumping in, but this is you hit a button. I don't think the numbers are where we think they are. I don't think that there's this 50-50 split in America that 160 million people think one thing and 160 million people think the opposite. I don't believe that at all. I believe that there are small pockets that are very loud, that have found a way to organize and orchestrate and coordinate and synchronize their messaging to put it out in such a way that it's there. And one step back to the comment with regard to police officers, let's think about another second and third order effect, right? So what happens? I mean, the big defense for the longest time was you don't need to have all these guns because you have police forces for those support purposes. So are we going to start to see a softening on the perspective of the Second Amendment, do you think? I don't think we will, but I think that that's something that we need to consider because what you also have seen is that in the last 2 to 3 months, background checks channeled through the FBI's background check system have been the highest in the history of those records being kept. And I think they're going to continue because I think that see a couple things here. Now, we pride ourselves on this show without playing politics. So let's just talk about facts. Beto O'Rourke, former representative out of West Texas, has been an advocate about you're darn right, I'm going to come take your assault rifle. Joe Biden has talked about, pointing him publicly into positions to head up, commissions and however they want to utilize that. I can probably guess that that's going to drive a lot of sales with regard to weaponry. Now you combine that with the concept of this virus, which I mean, who knows? Some people might take it as this is the zombie apocalypse, right? So they've watched the movie, that one too many times, World War Z or whatever you want to call it, Shaun of the Dead, and they realize that they're going to get out and they're going to protect themselves. That's a natural human instinct, self-preservation. So you've got these cases now where a lot of people are going to start arming themselves. Are you going to bring in someone now that's going to try to get rid of 350 million guns? What is that going to turn into? Because I don't think it's going to turn into this global perspective that people are going to fight for the Second Amendment. I don't think it's going to be some constitutional warfare. I think it's going to be people wanting to protect themselves and their family and to be able to have the choice. Because what they're going to say is, you took away our police force. What am I supposed to do now?
Mic drop.
Exactly.
Well, no, I don't. No, please. I don't mean that as a mic drop. I mean, I think that if we want to talk about things on the show, we want to talk about the feelings. We always want to say, listening to our friends, listening to our family. These are the conversations that I've been thinking about and I've been having with people. And I bring it to the show because I want to share it. I'm not trying to score points or look cool. I'm simply saying I don't know that we're considering the second and third order effects. Because it's so, if there's truly anything created by this culture, I think it's the concept of not just instant gratification, but creating instant gratification and then finding a way to have that last in perpetuity. I know that sounds ridiculous to say it that way, but let's create Alex, you mentioned the concept of victimhood mentality, right? Not true victimhood, not people that have suffered in an experience in life that involves support and love and nurturing and therapy. I'm talking about those who might be manipulating the terms for concept of identity. But what they have to do when you identify as a victim is you have to sustain that identity. So you have to perpetually live in this state of victimhood. That is what I think, to tie this back, ties into that concept of us having a concept of personal truth. Not because you only can do it as a victim, but the concept of personal truth to drive along a narrative in our own mind as to how we view ourselves in the world. And if we've done it through stripping of faith, stripping of the family, stripping of national pride, national culture, national identity, there's not a whole lot left except to be this one amongst many, right? And I worry about that. I worry that in this stripping of identity, we have not created a place for us to find security with one another, but rather we have to fight to be different. And I don't know that affords us an opportunity. I think that allows you to be canceled more easily because you're a one of one. Hey, I'll go after Alex. I know what he doesn't like. Hey, you guys remember 1986 when Alex made some comment about this? Hey, Alex, I disagree with this concept. And if you don't disagree with it and disavow it, you're the failure. And what we've really done is sacrificed our ability to have an honest apology with one another. Because through cancel culture, everything is so contrived with regard to regret. You put up something and then you can start the clock and this will be taken down in 5, 4, 3, followed by the immediate apology. 5, 4, 3. I regret my comments and realize that I wasn't capable of doing it. I mean, it's become lines in a play now. And is it truly a remorseful, regretful apology for an action? Or is it a need to reinforce that identity by any means necessary? Because the external validity we seek comes from a matter of clicks of likes on our Facebook page.
I'm gonna play off of that, and I want to ask Tim here a very specific question, because I think there's a question about how we move forward. Because we one of the things we agreed with early on is cancel culture isn't going to go away unless we actually fight it. And by go away, I mean it will go away one way or the other. The question is, though, are we left with something that promotes conversation and therefore progress, or is it something that is just so restrictive that no good ideas are actually played with? You mentioned that you are more liberal. I'm more conservative.
Yeah.
But I would actually call myself a classical liberal. There is a point where over the last century that liberalism and conservatism became synonymous with a particular, really a political view. Classic liberalism basically says, hey, let's be educated, but let's also restrain the government, right? And let's give more power and freedom to the people to solve their problems, to have these conversations, etc. as this previous century has gone on, that sort of got swept aside very much, and it's like, well, hey, we're going into these different ideas. Is it possible that the way we end cancel culture, I mean, and actually defeat it, in the way we maybe actually sort of solve this problem of playing politics, is to adopt a more libertarian mindset? Because I think really the libertarian mindset, in many ways, is more closely related to that classic liberalism, and allows everyone to kind of live together, right? It says, hey, let's look at the things that we all as a culture or society should deal with, right? That we should deal with corporately. But then those things that are more personal, right? Your personal religion, sexual identity and sexual preferences, things like how you spend your money. Let's leave that to the people to solve themselves or within their own communities.
Yeah.
But let's actually come together and let's figure out what those things are that we can do, and then let's do them. But also let's understand that if maybe we can't have an agreement on something, let's focus on things we can agree on and fix those, and then not just hang up on, well, this isn't everything I want. It seems like it's an all or nothing thing, right? And a great example of this is the crime bill that Tim Scott brought to the floor just a couple weeks that has been that the Democrats have shut down, right? It's like, he said, here's my crime bill. They said it was even like 70 to 80% what they were asking for. He opened it up for amendments, and it's like, nope, we can't even talk about it. Well, I thought you wanted police reform. Why can't we at least even talk about this? Like, let's have a conversation about this. And instead, they played this game where we're going to score political points by not actually doing something. And so I think really it's like what we need to do is really get back to the maybe that more libertarian mindset, that classical liberalism, where it's like, maybe we don't need to be looking to Washington to solve these problems. In fact, maybe that's sort of the problem, is we centralized everything so much that Washington has the power to screw us over that badly, right? Where it's like, we all want something to get done. It's like, well, maybe we should be doing our own communities and not waiting for somebody who's been in Washington for 150 years and has made $200 billion off of our tax money to decide not to solve the problem.
Right. Well, and it's real interesting talking to, like, I lean definitely left, as I've said previously, like, but it's this concept of, either I'm the answer to the question, or government is the answer to the question. And with a lot of people that I've talked to, they seem to want to choose one or the other and make it this black and white thing. And it's like, well, it's not black and white. There are certain things that I think the government needs to handle. Trade policy, military disputes, things like that. But when it gets down to the local level of whether or not, I want to put a cross up at my business or something, I don't think that should go to the Supreme Court. That's something that needs to be a little bit like that. That's just where government needs to get out of everything. I do agree that there are a lot of things that government needs to get out of. But I'm not going to claim that I have the answers to that. Because one of the other big things that I see as a problem right now is is education. I think that we're not allowing our teachers to actually teach our children. And so they get out of high school, and a lot of them are forced to go to college, and then they go to college and again, you're there to just meet numbers.
Right.
So they're not asking these questions. They're not, to bring it all the way back to the beginning of this, there is not a space where they can flesh out these ideas and ask the question, well, what should government be involved in? And where do I believe that I have a stand and a voice in this thing that is America? And so, it's either you graduate. So I'll use myself as a personal example here. You either graduate high school the way that I did, and I had no idea how to pay taxes. I had no idea what a mortgage was. I didn't understand how loans worked. I didn't understand voting. Like, I knew that it was something I was supposed to do, but I didn't understand what I was voting for. I didn't know how to go research these things, but I sure knew how to play the stock market, because that's what my economic teacher decided to teach us. And, I didn't understand how this government worked and I knew what the difference was between Democrats and Republicans and libertarians and the Green Party. And I understood it from a basic level. But then when I got into college, they still didn't teach things. Like, I went back and I took math in college, and I was like, wait a minute, this is all the stuff that I did in high school. And my English class was the same thing that I literally just did last year. We're reading the same books and doing almost exactly the same essays, and there's no discussions happening. If I was to question something, the teacher would say, well, that's just what's on the syllabus, and we need to teach the syllabus. I'm like, but I'm paying you in college to teach me a broader way of thinking, and you're not doing that.
Right.
So I think it's just this massive, I think cancel culture is the unwanted answer to the fact that we have not been educating the younger generations on how to think critically and how to accept someone's different opinion.
Oh, I agree. Well, maybe not the unwanted result. I think it is the unwanted answer. I think it's the result, right?
Yeah, I would say I said unwanted more of just in the sense of you didn't know this was coming, and now here it is.
Right. It's something that grew out. It's like it is this metastasized effect. Again, it's and you know what? I'm gonna push back even on what I'm about to say here preemptively.
Are you going to cancel yourself?
I'm going to cancel myself. But I was about to say, the law of unintended consequences, right? It's sort of like the law of unintended consequences, but I don't know how unintended cancel culture is. I am legitimately, I'm not a conspiracy theorist in general, but I do believe that I don't know that necessarily all this was as unplanned as we think. I'm not saying that there's like Dick Dastardly back there twirling his mustache, right?
Oh, there is.
Well, probably. But there is such a direct and universal approach on how so many of these things were done. It's like, this just doesn't feel random. This feels very deliberate and very intentional in many, many ways. And so, like, here's even a question that I think, to what Tim said. When you say government, do you mean the federal government that's in Washington, or do you mean local and state? And I think that's sort of the whole thing. Is like, when we say government, we all, I think, instinctively mean Washington. And
I mean all of it. Right. I mean, and I think that at certain levels, like, each level of government needs to be more or less involved in certain areas, depending on what that, like the federal government needs to be involved in certain things, but then not other things. Whereas, like, the local government needs to be involved in those other things that the federal government's not involved in, you know?
Right. Well, and so I would completely agree. In fact, what I would say is, when you look at kind of how it was originally set up, the idea was the governments that had the most power was the local government, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's like, as it expanded to, you have your city, then your county, then your state, and then you have the national. It's like the further away you got from the people, the less power they were supposed to have. And what we've done is we've inverted it, where now Washington has almost all the power. And then it's like the people who are closest to the government that's closest to the people has less power, and less significant power. So it gets ignored, which is where a lot of the corruption actually is. And I think that this is one of those things that cancel culture sort of is able to feed off of, is this very nationalized conversation where it's like every conversation is sort of held within this national broader context. It's like, well, no. If we really want to solve problems, we kind of need to do we kind of need to invert that and have the conversations on the very local, regional level where I can go and have breakfast with the mayor, right, of the city that I live in. I could make that happen. I live in a smaller city. I could talk to the sheriff. I could know these people by name. Why? Those are the people we need to be talking to solve our problems. And Washington needs to be like, well, needs to be like, we're going to kind of keep our hands off until there is a real universal sort of appeal on something. Again, military, international trade. Obviously, Washington should have the power there.
Yeah,
it's like the problem is we've sort of centralized all that power in one place, and then what that's effectively done is remove the power from the citizenry, right? And I think this is sort of why I'm saying we need to, or I'm sort of really thinking we need to go back to this universal or this more classical liberal mentality where it's like, hey, we need to focus on, as Eisenhower said, educating the populace, because I think that's a great point that you brought up, which is we aren't teaching kids anymore. Okay, let's go back to the idea of the First Amendment protecting speech that we don't like. George Carlin had one towards the end of one of his last stand-ups. One of the things he talked about what very, very vocally was, we don't educate people in this country anymore. Because the people at the top don't want people educated. What they want is us just smart enough to do the paperwork and pay our taxes, and that's it. Because if you were really educated, you'd start asking questions like, hey, where is all this tax money going to begin with? Like, why are there people who've been in Washington for, again, 30, 40 years? They went in sort of upper middle class and they're coming out wealthier than the CEOs of most companies.
Right.
That doesn't sound like that's a bigger problem. We would start asking questions like, and this is one I always go back to. One of the first things that when the Republicans first took the House and Senate in the early 90s, they had an audit done of the federal budget. Just said, where is all this money going? And it's the only audit that has actually ever been done by an independent agency of our federal spending. And H&R Block came back and said, look, we know where the black funds are. We know what the CIA and we can sort of account for that. But they flat out said, and this was in the 90s, that of the federal budget, more than half, they had no idea where it went. They're like, we see was line items here, but then it just disappears.
Yeah.
Like, that's a problem. And we don't talk about it. And like you said, you didn't know how to pay your taxes or how to have this conversation. I think that this is far more by design. And I think that there is that we need to really, in order to again, I think cancel culture is really an outgrowth of this broader problem. And I think we need to just invert the power structure. Let's take the power out of Washington and bring it back to the local level. And then we as citizens have to take the responsibility to actually interact with our own governments and actually hold their feet to the fire and hold them accountable.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Well, dang it. You were supposed to be the one who disagreed with us, and all we're having is a big love fest of how we all agree with one another. And maybe, so you know what?
Well, let me
ask this. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe this right here, what we're having, is like, you're liberal, I'm conservative, and we're agreeing on all this. Maybe that's what cancel culture is trying to prevent. Because
I would say absolutely that I very much feel that is something that it is trying to. Well, I would say that the masterminds behind it would want to prevent. I know many people who have, been a, part of the Twitter mob that is angrily tweeted people, but when you get, and on the internet they're one thing, but then when you get them and they, and you talk to them, they're not exactly like that in person, which is another thing of the internet that you could, do a whole, dissertation on about how people are one way off the internet and people are another way on the internet.
Lots of sheer cons behind the keyboard, but you get them in you get them in face to face, they suddenly become the cowardly lion.
I think that one of the reasons I don't think I very much disagreed with you on pretty much anything was because we're talking about the specific thing that we're talking about is I think that any sane person would look at this. And let me rephrase this. I have not met someone who truly, like, they may have tweeted the certain thing at them, but if you really pin it down, they're not like, no, they need to be canceled for this reason. It's getting swept up in that mob. I think that any sane person would look at kind of what's going on, like with the removal of the Confederate statues. I know a ton of people, myself included, who are absolutely for that. But then when you get it all the way up to like, well, we need to remove the Lincoln Memorial, it's like, wait a minute, time out. Okay, I don't think you're jumping here. So
yeah, when you're tearing down statues of Frederick Douglass, I think
right.
Yeah, this is not what you claimed, or this is not what everyone said it was.
Right, which is why I would say that the subject matter of what we're talking about, I think is the reason that I haven't so much disagreed with you on all of this, because I truly believe that any sane person wouldn't. And I also believe in, I believe the freedom of speech, as Nick said earlier. It is to allow that working out of an idea that may initially sound really bad, or it's just kind of like, wait, what? I don't understand what you're saying here, but it allows that idea to be worked out. And because initially, I don't think that the first thing that Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson or any of them ever said in the constitutional meeting to put this thing together, I don't think that anything that those guys said initially was probably some miraculously brilliant idea. It took time to flesh all of this out. Right. I mean, you spit something out, and if it sticks to the wall, I mean, if you take something and throw it at the wall, it's not going to make this perfectly beautiful image. I mean, unless you're into splatter art, but a paintbrush first stuck on a when you first take a paintbrush and stick it on a canvas, it's not going to look that pretty until you finish fleshing out the idea. And that's something I think that is sorely missing in this environment that we're in right now socially.
Right. It's perfection or nothing.
Right. And so while there's probably a plethora of things, I would be willing to state that if we had a talk about economics, I'd probably disagree with you on some things.
All right. Something to look forward to.
Yeah, something to look forward to. And with the fact that you like The Last Jedi, I vehemently disagree with that.
All right. Well, that may come to blows. But it's so okay. Well, but I think this is exactly the point, right? That we're saying cancel culture is preventing a real conversation. Now, again, I think cancel culture is the byproduct of a lot of steps. Nothing ever emerges fully formed. Cancel culture is, I think, the byproduct of a lot of these smaller ideological purity tests that have been fashioned over the decades. But I think the thing is, it is, unfortunately, as humans, we're very reactive creatures. Things kind of need to get as bad as they get before we're like, oh, okay, well, we can't do that anymore. And then we correct, right? Mm-hmm. I think it was Churchill who famously said Americans will always do the right thing after they've tried everything else first. But you know what? That's in many ways that's human nature. But so I think it goes back to a very early point made. We have to fight this back, right? And we're an hour and 8 into it. We're sort of back to that initial concept of how do we even fight back? What does that even look like? Because right now, honestly, it looks to me like, just as I look around, those who are loudest, those who are most violent, win. That's what I'm seeing, and that's a problem, because if this continues for much longer, then there is no place to go but violence. My father always taught me, like, I learned how to fight, learned how to shoot, but I've even taught self-defense. The thing I've always taken away from this, and the one thing my father always said is, as soon as something escalates into violence, you can no longer control the outcome. That's why I always taught people, it's like, look, if someone asks for your wallet, just give them your wallet, right? Like, if it escalates into violence, there's nothing more than you don't know who walks away from that.
Right.
And it's like, the problem is, if we allow the loud and the violent to have their way, then there is no recourse. There is no conversation. There is only the unloading of clips, right there. Like, that's where it's going to turn into, and it's going to turn into a hot shooting war. And let me just say this. I think, because again, a lot of voices just aren't heard in today's media. And I'm certainly not advocating anything. This is simply an observation of history. There are plenty of instances where violence has been absolutely used to govern and determine political outcomes. If that's the case, it's like, it's going to get ugly really, really quick. And that is not something that I think any of us wants to happen, which is why conversation is so important. It is needed to prevent violence from occurring.
Right.
So how do we fight? So how do we stop this before this turns into a real shooting war? Because it honestly looks like one side is trying its best to stay nonviolent, and this cancel culture keeps pushing and escalating. How do we stop it from escalating even further?
Well, I would say that what we've done here in this 1 hour, 10 minutes, and 50 seconds is a damn good start. And if I think in a lot of cases, it's not, you can't tell somebody like, this is what you need to do to fix it. You have to demonstrate, like, watch me. We're going to do this. Now watch what happens. And it's what we've done for the last hour and 10 minutes, actually have a conversation about these things. And while we didn't disagree a whole lot, we at least had the conversation. I stayed quiet for a lot because of you guys were both saying things that, I kind of read, but never really heard put out into a verbal, fleshed out thought.
And that right there might be the reason as to why people don't want those to get out, because those ideas can form when supported by ideas and thoughts and facts and statistics. It's a lot easier to have your mind changed or open to something, but sometimes that pushes against a narrative that isn't desirable at the time. And that's something that's we've got to be mindful of. I just want to jump in. I'm reminded a lot of the quotes from the ancient Greeks who used to say, in war, truth is the first casualty. Right. And I think we're replacing the truth, with a truth, or my truth, or that truth, or this truth. And the concern to that is we have a vehicle in the internet that provides us with an opportunity to say as much as we want in many directions all the time. Again, reminded of another quote: say something loud enough, long enough to enough people, and a lie becomes the truth. And the danger of that is that it starts to undermine things that are truly substantially valuable to a culture, in terms of its identity, the beliefs that it has, the way that it recognizes itself, and it individualizes itself from the rest of the world. I think that this country has experienced a run of opulence and security that is unmatched in the world over the last 150 years. And I think that with that has come a feeling that liberty is somehow guaranteed, that prosperity is somehow a right, and that the privileges that we take for granted somehow were divinely given to us. And I just don't think that to be the case. I think within the context of a country, the only divine right that you have with the belief of being an American from that perspective are those inalienable rights, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Outside of that, get in line, kid.
I do remember when I was in high school, one of my history teachers did say something that's kind of stuck with me when we were talking about that, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he said, those are your inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But he's like, I want to focus on the last one, the pursuit of happiness. This does not guarantee you that you will be happy, but we guarantee you the right to pursue that. And I was like, oh, that's really...
Or get in the way. Correct. Yeah, I like that.
I was like, oh, okay. I never really thought about it that way. But no, I would say that one of I to me, in looking at all of this, one of the most dangerous things that I've seen, and one of the things that just absolutely like blows my mind, honestly, is that there are on both sides of the spectrum here, there are all these people who just come out with these YouTube channels of opinions, and they start spouting off all this stuff, and people will post it to their Facebook and be like, "Look at what this guy said. Like, I agree with this," and yada yada yada. And they state all these things as fact, and then they show no sources of where they got their information. They just put up a 5-minute video of these things, and people just bite into it, and they're like, "Oh, this is great. This is my echo chamber. That I really like what this person is saying, and it makes me feel better about myself." My mother, like when I first wrote a research paper in high school, she was a journalism major, and so she beat it into me, not physically, but beat it into me that when you do something like this, sources, you have to show where you got your information, because just stating something doesn't work. You have no proof that what you're saying is the truth, and there's incredibly rare exceptions, like if you were physically there, you are the source. You are physically a part of the event that happened, you are a source. But if you're just a bystander, who's reading it in a newspaper, and then you turn around and want to talk about it, you're not a source, you're someone who's read it. So I think misinformation has truly led to a lot of this, is one of the biggest culprits in this cancel culture. I think is that no one, you're getting information that's not true a lot of the time. And I think was it Denzel Washington who said to the news reporters, it was like, you're so focused on being first, you're not focused on being right.
That's correct.
And
he said, you're in an attempt to be first, you've surrendered the attempt to want to be right, and therefore it's about getting it out there and doing it. He said, so you either don't read the news and you're uninformed, or you read the news and you're misinformed.
Right. And I think if there's one thing that needs to be truly gotten rid of, it's the 24-hour news cycle.
Oh, absolutely. There's a book out there, I forget the author's name, but it's called How the News Makes Us Dumber. Right?
I actually have that book. I'm going to go get it right now. I'm going to go read it. Hold on.
Oh, crap. Right. Maybe I'm more conservative than I thought.
Well, so that's the whole thing, right? So actually, let's take a step back. Well, you know what? That's actually been my experiences. Most people are actually more conservative than they think, right? It's what you aren't is what you're told conservatism is. But let's divert. We can save that for another conversation.
Yeah, another conversation.
Yeah, like when we discuss how wrong you are about Last Jedi. But
quickly, team, I have, not to get in the way of the Force and the midichlorians, but I have something here. So it's How the News Makes Us Dumb: The Death of Wisdom in an Information Society by C. John Somerville.
Yeah.
And it's a quick read. I mean, it's a grand total of 150 pages or so, and it's something for us to think about. We can address some show in the future, but we've talked about this before briefly, and it's the concept of that 24-hour news cycle, and that when you have something that you can never shut off, sometimes you have to ask yourself, is it a good or bad thing?
Right. And so maybe this is the question I want to end on, since we are an hour and 18 minutes into this hour-long episode.
It's an hour and 8 minutes. Are we done here?
Yeah. we got places to be, man. No. So let me end on this question. Maybe we have to say this for the next episode in which Timothy is on. Is the 24-hour news cycle actually doing us a disservice? Because like you said, we have to be right, and we're wrong, and we're first instead of being right. And secondly, is the postmodern view that there is no such thing as objective truth also to blame for this? Because if there is no objective truth, then it goes back to Nick's point of then there is only my truth. In which case, if there's no objective truth that we can all agree to, then there's nothing we can solve. It's only whose truth is going to be loudest, which goes back to my point of if that's the case, then those who are most violent win. And there isn't a conversation over what is actually true in which a conversation can be had and a solution can be resolved. Then it seems like we need to sort of play with those questions next time on Not Playing Politics.
I probably disagree more.
Yeah, exactly. That way we can disagree more. So, Tim, thank you for coming on today's episode. We will have you back to further this conversation. Nick, thank you for getting the book and giving us the title for that. Guys, let's do this again.
Yeah, and thank you, Alex, for being wrong about The Last Jedi.
You're welcome. I try.
Well, it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah.
Guys, everybody be well, be safe. To our friends, family, and listeners out there, thank you guys so much. Stay safe and do good things. Do good things for one another. Take care.
Bye.